Stacey, you know, we spent an awful lot of time in discussing clarity of role and accountabilities. And I'm interested if you could remark on what seems to be possible now that wasn't before as your leaders on your team get more and more clear about what you expect and what they're being in those
roles. I think one of the biggest shifts for us is, you know, unlike the private sector, that has very clear roles, accountabilities, metrics, you have to perform, here's kind of the process in which that performance will be evaluated. The nonprofit sector is a lot more, I'll say, touchy-feely. And your performance is project-driven, and it may or may not have been a success. And as a result, the leaders that are what I'll call they grow up in the nonprofit sector, are really positioned based on the projects that they've had, which is slightly different when you actually are in an organization that says you have to play as an organizational leader and you also have to play as a content leader. And so your job is to really, one, make sure you're making decisions that's best to advance the organization. And at the same time, you have to bring value to the organization in the work in which you lead. For us, that was, again, while it sounds silly, but it really wasn't. It really provided language and accountability structure. It gave a new definition for the word teaming, because we used to have lots of teams and people would come together for hours on end, and I would walk by conference room and calculate all of the salaries that were in the room, and then I'd ask them, well, what was the outcome? And inevitably somebody would tell me, well, we have to meet again. And I'd be like, oh my gosh, we just spent X number of hundreds of thousands of dollars and literally no decision was made. So people did not know how to manage with 100% accountability. But that also meant as an organization, we had to build the infrastructure to let them succeed at that. And that as the leader, I had to be very clear about my expectations. And when we gave ourselves permission to actually do that, we found people have been performing at a much higher rate. We've been more efficient in our delivery. We're actually, as I said, surviving a financial crisis that we probably would not have survived had we not utilized our resources in a very directed way, because now the team can play with each other in ways that they could not before.
You know that our alignment is not a pretty process. And in fact, we tend to get on the table some conversations that may have been ineffective in the past or not spoken of at all. And can you mention what it was like to actually manage conflict perhaps in a new way, or in a way that wouldn't blow things up, or would then actually get to good decisions, good answers, new outcomes? So how do you think tension and conflict can be handled and has been handled in such a way that becomes productive?
I would say alignment is definitely not pretty. I would think, but I would say if people know that going in, that the end result of that process is to really, I thought of it as sandpaper. You know, there was everybody on the team, and every conflict was like a piece of sandpaper roughing out the rough edges, you know, smoothing out the rough edges. And I think if people have to go into it with the idea this is going to make us better, they've also got to go into this like, I'm going to play 100%. And that means being emotional about it, but understanding, okay, alignment is a safe space for you to go through the emotion. And I think the team has got to be very aware of that and respectful of it. I would also say that it becomes a safe space, even though it's not intuitive or clear at the very beginning, that you really can bring up the things that are unspoken. And we had a lot of that in our team alignment, of all the things that, you know, we knew in the quiet of night, but nobody was really willing to voice. And I think when Laura and myself actually stepped forth and said, we're going to voice it, then that gave the team permission to voice those things. And we were then able to work them out. And I would say it's an ongoing process. It is not something that ends when the consultants leave. A matter of fact, I would say it probably gets a little scarier after the consultancy because you don't have anybody to manage the conflict. But if you keep the team together and you manage it with respect and assure people this is a safe space, you can voice the things that you don't want to voice. But please then be accountable for the solution that we come up with. No one gets to walk away.
Could you mention some of the tools and how the process served you in your recent transition, where you're now the CEO of the organization, where before there were more resources in your role, around your role, and now as we've reconstructed, and the team, having stayed intact, we're now poised on a new chapter, Can you mention how the process or tools helped make that transition possible?
Yeah, I would say, in a lot of ways, to walk into the role of a CEO and have a structure in place, have your vision, your mission, our services already defined, to have an organizational structure defined that actually is working is the greatest gift that you can be given as a new CEO. And it also created a space where I could actually hone in the areas that we're still struggling with, as opposed to having to start all the way at the beginning. I don't have to do that. So the tools around the systems of roles is really the space that we are spending the most time on now, because we moved to the matrix where we have the businesses and the functions, but now we've got to get them to operate in really, which is more around defining our business processes, not the business itself, but how we deliver the business is what we're focusing our time on. So I think the system of roles, the language was key. I also think the definition, the operating manual, and having a place that we could go back to and say, oh, okay, no, this was the concept we were talking about. The go-to-market triangle for us was revolutionary. It literally put our entire service delivery structure and our future services in a very concise, beautiful little triangle. And now we have 3 intersecting triangles that we absolutely love. This idea that a division develops, sells, and delivers all parts of their business was huge, because we had broke all the functions. We had broke deliver out and develop out and delivery out. And as a result, we were able to diagnose where our weaknesses were. And we are an awesome organization that can design the best youth program in the world. We can sell it. I used to tell people I can get an inanimate object into college if necessary, because I'm a good salesperson. But when it came to delivery, it just all fell apart. And the people that were in the develop and sell divisions didn't see that. And the people that were in the delivery didn't really understand what was developed or sold. And so that language allowed us to then say, wow, we actually see all parts, and we can hold each other accountable. And we can also, through the systems role, yes, you, division head, are accountable. You then have to pull in the expertise of your colleagues to help you move around the triangle. So I would say, in terms of the concepts that were introduced, they really did force us to diagnose the things we were really good at, and diagnose the things that we weren't good at, that we were not good at, and also then allowed us to develop a solution that really made sense.
Fantastic. Some of the traps that your peer CEOs of even successful nonprofit organizations fall into as they work with their leadership teams. Could you mention what you think are some traps that people in your role fall into, and some of the ways you've discovered to keep some distance between you and the trap, and to actually come out of it or stay out of it?
I mean, I think for me, and just observing and asking, when I knew I was going to assume this role, I started asking a lot of questions of people that I really respect and admired, and started doing a lot of reading and so that sort. And I think, some of them are very basic, like you have to remain curious. You have to keep asking questions, and really ask questions of your team in a way that leads them to a different conclusion. I think not paying attention to your human capital is one of the biggest mistakes you can make. I cannot deliver all the services of PYN independently. I really do have to have a team at the end of the day that is above none, and they can deliver on the promises that I then am out making on behalf of the organization. And I think you have to pay attention to what your customer is telling you. You have to stop trying to sell an outdated service. And things are moving so fast now in our society. You know, 10 years ago, Apple was something people ate. You know, Apple now has dominated the entire mobile technology platform. You know, a BlackBerry was a fruit as opposed to it being a critical device of communication. So as things are moving very quickly, you have to have people that are behind you. And that means, lastly, I think a trap is you have to be able to, I think, lead with humility and grace. While as the leader, you have to be willing to have a vision and communicate that out and hold people accountable. Again, you also have to make sure that you have people that are committed to the vision that you've set and they're willing to follow you, because if they're not, then you can't deliver anything.